32. Essential idea in the passage is that successful sectors of the modern economy. What? So we go to the passage and we see really the first sentence. Our economy is increasingly ruled by a few dominant firms. There have always been large companies and outright monopolies, but there's something distinctive about this new generation of what economists call superstar companies. And it talks about here that the share of sales by superstar companies has gone up sharply in all the sectors they looked at. So we see this massive concentration of market power in a few players like Amazon, Google, et cetera, et cetera. So we look at our choices. I like B. Have experienced a shift toward the centralization of power by a few companies. Looks good. When I look at A, include only companies that are willing to use innovative technology. Very strong word, only. Certainly using innovative technology helps in successful businesses, but that's a little too strong. It doesn't really talk about labor growth and who's going to grow faster in terms of labor. D seems like, maybe it's likely, but it's just not something that's mentioned. I'm looking for specific lines to support my answer, and I found those specific lines to support choice B. 33. The author of the passage develops his argument primarily by. So we look at this passage. What is the author using to support their claims? And we can see they're citing research, and there's more sort of research discussed here, and there's some more research here too. So it's all about research. Here's the research that supports my claims. So I like, therefore, choice D, presenting research concerning the rise of a subset of companies, specifically these superstar companies. Analyzing the effect of technological advances on future market trends. It's more like the past, what's happened up till now. Examining the process by which one company, no, it's not focusing on just one company. Comparing historical national labor data to present labor data, no, that's not the main thing that's going on here. It's not a primary way that they develop their argument. So 33 has got to be D. 34. Which choice best supports the conclusion that in certain industries, companies have little chance of succeeding if they cannot obtain the market control held by superstar companies? So, yeah, we want to see where's the evidence that if in certain industries you can't succeed if you don't attain the market control held by superstar companies. So in other words, places where it's winner takes all, where a big company basically takes everything and a small company doesn't. And the key lines I see, although the numbers are off here, that's weird. It says 28 to 30, but really it's 27 to 29. In any event, that's why it's important to look at the words. So choice C starts with in other and ends with bother. So it's this one right here. In other words, you have to be the smartest company in your field, or you might as well not bother. So in other words, you got to be number one, or that's it. There's really only room for one big company in these certain sectors. And so therefore, companies that can't have that control, don't have that power, have little chance of succeeding. And so that fits with choice C. 35, 36, the passage most directly suggests that in recent years, companies that have been less successful than superstar companies have tended to. So 1 to 52, where do they talk about companies that have been less successful and what they have done or haven't done that makes them less successful? And I see in these lines, it says, the superstar companies appear across a broad range of business sectors and have gained their power, at least in part, by adeptly anticipating and using digital technologies that foster conditions where a few winners essentially take all. So these successful companies have used technology effectively, which suggests that companies that aren't successful have not used technology effectively. And so when I look at choice A, these less successful companies have failed to capitalize on emerging technologies that may provide a competitive economic advantage. And so that goes with choice B. It doesn't talk about hiring. Careful with C. Focus. No, so it says here, companies that have been less successful have tended to focus on developing groundbreaking technologies. No, that's the problem. They haven't really, according to the passage, worked with technology as well as the successful companies have. Have tended to vie with a smaller pool of competitors. Doesn't say that specifically. So 35 is A, 36 B. 37, line 12, conditions. They appear across a broad range of business sectors and have gained their power, at least in part, by adeptly anticipating and using digital technologies that foster blank, where a few winners essentially take all. So I might say something like situations, something like that. Conditions, situations. What do we got? Circumstances. That fits, right? Sort of a set of sort of environment or scenario in which something is true. Circumstances. Restrictions, no. Demands, no. Qualifications, no. I mean, plug those in. Let's see how they sound. Using digital technologies that foster restrictions, where a few winners take all. Conditions and restrictions, in this context at least, are not really overlapping in meaning. That foster demands, that foster qualifications, no. On the other hand, using digital technologies that foster circumstances where a few winners take all, yeah, that makes sense. So best answer to number 37 is B. 38, line 32, deeply. So, again, the line's off line 31. In itself, that might not be bad, but the authors identified a blank, troubling result of an economy where just a few top-tier companies dominate. So deeply troubling. This is not very fancy, but that's okay. Very troubling. Strongly troubling. Something like that. Significantly troubling. We're looking for a word of that. An intensifying word. Well, I'll just read these choices in the context. So, but the authors identified a broadly troubling. If you think about broad and deep, those are almost antonyms. Those are almost opposite words. So it's not really working. Thoughtfully troubling? No. Obscurely troubling? No. Profoundly troubling? Aha. Profound and deep in this context have similar meanings, similar usages. And so therefore 38 is D. 39, in context, the last two paragraphs serve mainly to. So we're going to look at these last two paragraphs. What is the point of them? So the first paragraph, I think, introduces essentially the point, starting on line 50. The rise of the superstar companies also might help explain another disturbing economic trend. And that trend is that even though there is this explosion in technology, digital technology, overall productivity has not increased, has not kept pace, or overall economic growth has not kept pace. And the second paragraph also sort of gives a possible reason why that's happening. So examine why technological advances outpace economic growth. Exactly. Why is it that technology is, rocketing ahead, but economic growth isn't keeping pace? So I like A. It's not talking about employment rates, not really focusing on yearly earnings or anything like that for a company. And D is just not really mentioned. So best answer here is A. 40, which claim is supported by the figures? So very long and annoying choices here, but let's break it down piece by piece. This is a question that I might skip and come back to later because I'm not, and maybe even same thing with 41. I'm just not a big fan of these long choices, but we'll do the best we can. Let's do it now. A, by 2004, the average percent change in total factor productivity for frontier firms in business services, so that's this curve right here, was greater than that for frontier firms in manufacturing. So frontier firms, no, this was business services, sorry. Business services is here. And frontier firms for manufacturing is this one. And so they're saying by 2004, the average percent change was greater for this one. I mean, here's 2004. For them, it's about 25-ish%. Here in 2004, it's about 10%. I mean, A looks true to me. A looks consistent with what we see in the figure, so I'm liking A, but let's check the rest. By 2013, the total factor productivity for non-frontier firms in both business services and manufacturing reflected growth resulting from expansion into new areas of commerce. This figure gives us no reason why the lines are like this. I don't know if this expansion is because of that or some other factor. This is just not something that's mentioned in the figure, and I don't want to make assumptions that are not based on the figure. C, the average percent change in total factor productivity for non-frontier firms in business services, that would be right here, increased overall from 2001 to 2013. Yeah, I guess. Yeah, that seems true. While that for non-frontier firms in manufacturing decreased, no, that also increased. So C is wrong. D, fluctuations in the average percent change in total factor productivity for frontier firms and business services from 2001 to 2013 were consistent with those for frontier firms in manufacturing. So you're comparing these lines to the variations or the fluctuations in these lines corresponds to variations or fluctuations in these lines. I mean, not really. I mean, notice this part's increasing, this part's decreasing. I mean, that's just not consistent at all. So I don't see any consistency between those. So the one here that we do find evidence for is choice A. 41, what do the figures support about total factor productivity? So again, let's take it piece by piece here. Okay. A, non-frontier firms in the business services sector. So that would be this purple curve. Were more profitable during this period than non-frontier firms in the manufacturing sector due to their productivity. It doesn't say anything in these figures about profits, and I can't make any assumptions. They're not supporting the figures. It's only about productivity. And if anything, it looks like manufacturing is bigger anyway in terms of this productivity change. So either way, A is not good. B, productivity increases in the business services sector in this period correspond to productivity decreases in the manufacturing sector. So I've got increases in business, but I don't really see decreases in the manufacturing. So I don't think I see evidence for B. C, the disparity in productivity between frontier and non-frontier firms in the manufacturing and business services sector generally increase. So when we look at these two figures, notice at first the difference between these curves is, there's a difference, but it's not too big. But over time in the manufacturing graph, that difference grows. Same thing is true for business services. That difference, that disparity between those two curves, between the frontier and non-frontier for each of these is getting bigger. So I'm liking C. D, the manufacturing sector was more productive because it tended to adapt more readily to technological advances in this period. Okay, this is like choice A, making claims about things that are just not in the figure. I don't know what technology may or may not have to do with anything in these figures. Maybe D makes sense. Maybe D is even true. But the question is what the figures support. And you can't pick a choice that makes sense or even is true if the figures don't provide support for it. So 41 is C. Okay, so 42. We're looking at figure 1. So according to figure 1, in approximately which year was the average percent change in total factor productivity since 2001 greatest for frontier firms? So here's frontier firms. Here is where it was greatest. This is about 2007, where it reaches that peak, and then declines slightly from there. So therefore, when we look at our choices, 42 would have to be choice B.